Thank you. We'll start now the budget workshop for consistency. I think most people have been here already before, but for consistency, I'll go through the presentation. I don't know if you have a few words, Milo. Okay. So I'll go ahead and go with the proposed budget. The only difference with this presentation is it's different from the first one, but this is the same one that was presented at Shadow Oak. So here is a summary of the budget process. This year's process began last December with a budget survey that began in December through May. And we'll go over the budget results later in this presentation, but then we went over the long-range financial forecast, which was not filed, it was presented, and I'll have to submit later before I do the adopted budget submitted to GFOA. The proposed budget was already presented to Council June 3rd, and the budget adoption scheduled for June 17th, so July 1st we have an adopted budget. Revenues overall are $144.2 million, and expenditures are $156.1 million. General fund is the largest, and so we have like an estimated of 768 right now. Actually, I don't know if did it change? It's going to change a little bit, right, for this one. Okay. There was a deficit of $3 million in 22-23. General fund reserves, this is the breakdown for the sales tax. I don't know if there are any questions, actually, since everyone has been here before. No.
I didn't make it to the first one, that's why. I hadn't seen the presentation.
Oh, really? You had it?
I came in late. The first one, never attended.
Okay, let's do this.
Oh, you don't
Most
have
of
to.
the,
You don't have to.
well, no, I just want to make sure it's a dialogue input, and I was like, oh, I've seen everyone here. But property tax, sales tax, and other taxes, that pretty much makes up like 76 million, or 76%, sorry, 76% of the general fund revenues. And this is how it's illustrated. This is the comparison of the general fund budget. Here you can see property tax I've estimated to be about 3% more. This is from last year's budget. Sales tax is 11.2% more. This is from last year's budget as well. But it's more aligned with what the budget was for 25, what we're estimating for this fiscal year, 24-25. Then we have other taxes, charges for services. We have Proposition A exchange, which we're exchanging this year, just for full disclosure here. And then we have other general fund revenues. This is our fund balance, how it's been consistent for the 21 million over the years. Well, revenue has increased, expenditures have increased at a higher rate, and so this is where it's been at 82.4 million. And this is the detail of the expenditures. We can see community services, and that's just for special events, that has gone up 14%, but everything else is pretty much consistent. The biggest difference is workers' comp and unfunded accrued liability, really that's driving the increase here. This is our full-time employees by department within the general fund, the largest being police, then followed by fire. We also have finance, which includes the IT division, public works, and community services. Pension costs, this is the largest drive here that's increasing, and as you can see there, I know it's like on the bottom, but from the bottom to the top, it's going up a lot, and that's really to do with the unfunded accrued liability, which you can get this information from CalPERS. That's just something that is going up based on the actual costs that it's doing for all the retirements. And the normal cost is really being consistent all throughout. It is warm in here, huh? Okay, so this is our workers' comp. The prior year actuals being at 1.7 million, and then 2.4, it's really what we've been budgeting for, but this is our estimate, and it's pretty much consistent. And then this is what we have our proposed budget to go up. And this is because in 2022, there was a 12.7 million liability. Then in 2023, there was 20.5 million liability. And this is where like the biggest increase happened 2 years ago. And then in 2024, which is the latest actuarial that we have, it went up to 24.5 million. So this is where we have to keep estimating a little bit more, and it comes from our payroll. That employer cost that's coming for workers' comp. And this is the workers' comp projected losses, not to do with the liability. So this is, even though we're funding it, the last slide was what we were funding and what has been funded throughout the years. However, this slide illustrates what the projected losses are projected to be based on that actuarial. So you can see I'm funding 3 million or whatever it may be. And this is for, and I keep on saying workers' comp, and I mean workers' comp plus general liability. So this is an actuarial for both. And you can see the projected losses, it continues to rise, and so really it is doubling.
Excuse me, the last number at the top of the, what is that loss?
I'm sorry?
What is the action on, I can't see
Oh,
on the slide.
7.26, is that what you mean for fiscal year 2029?
Correct.
7.26 million.
Thank you.
That's in millions. That is 5 years in advance, but this is like what it is, and not every case does get closed, as I'm sure you're also familiar with. Open liability claims, this is the distribution of the claim liability. However, this is not based on a dollar amount, although the before was a dollar amount. This is based on the number of cases and its distribution. So we have vehicle accident being, I guess, the largest, 24%. Then we have falling tree and limbs, 12%. And I'm not going in order of the percentages, but taking a big toll on that. There's slip and trip, 16%. Pothole damage, 12%. Root intrusion, 8%, also with employment and termination. In 2019, the city's excess insurance carrier, California, or CalGPA I like to say, but California Joint Powers Insurance Authority, performed an initial risk management evaluation to assist the city in addressing areas in which risk, exposure, or loss data support the need for the change of operations or activity. The report identified 63 action items, and so this is reviewed monthly. The city has covered over 50, have completed over 50, and a few are still in progress. So the status of the action items are reviewed monthly with the CalGPIA risk manager. So these are our efforts to reduce the risk. This is the 25-26 proposed budget that has been based on prior year's actuals with an estimated increase in line with base salary increases. So this is overtime. As you can see, most of it is coming from PD. The number on there is 6.76 million that is proposed for the next fiscal year, which is in line with what we are trending and what last year's budget is as well. Most of it being police with 3.5 million, which I just said, and also fire, which is almost about 3 million. Oh, sorry. Okay, as I mentioned in the beginning, we had the Bridget survey that was open and closed about a couple weeks ago. So we had 28 responses, and from there, it stayed the same, obviously, because there weren't any new. There were 86 residents, 32% property owners, and 21% employed in West Covina. So the respondents, it was geared, there were 10 questions, and I just summarized what is the importance of funding. Infrastructure was number one, police, and then it's followed by fire. And what are some things that some of the residents or the respondents thought or had their input that needed improvement? And that would be streets, sidewalks, and traffic signals, followed by economic development and affordable housing. So those were the results there. For the budget for the next fiscal year, the service levels have been maintained with the base budget, also with FTEs, the same FTEs. There's no new positions that were added as of the proposed budget, for the proposed budget, in comparison to 24-25 budget. Recreation and community service programs, including the Sportsplex operations, were included, and that is a separate fund. If there are any deficits, it's coming from the general fund. Special events are also included and have been added into the budget just to be consistent, as I mentioned before, on the general fund expenditures, to be consistent with what the expenditures are trending for this fiscal year and have been trending for the past couple of years. Tree trimming and landscaping maintenance, to avoid any more adjustments and amendments that come to council. So this is disclosure. Everything else, service levels maintained. Oh, this was the difference. This was the one slide that is different from the first presentation that I believe one person wasn't here for. So this is the one that I included in the second one and this one. As you can see, that's why it was increased, and I said the expenditures, we included them so that it is with what we have been spending already this fiscal year and in the past. So we have, these are, and this, just to compare apples to apples, this does not include salaries. So these are the expenditures and what the proposed budget is for the next fiscal year. I can list them out, but I think you can see clearly. It's $466,000 out of general fund. Other considerations, as I mentioned before, we do have the Sportsplex. However, long-term, we're evaluating opportunities for the complex to be self-sustaining and increase the local sales tax base. The health department, until direction is provided, which should be soon, the city is in a holding pattern. So no new expenditures relating to the health that have not been approved are included in the budget. And nothing is coming from the general fund as well. The chamber, the city established a chamber as a pilot program, and so there haven't been any expenditures also that's included in the budget for that. These are the 25-26 funded capital projects. I won't list them all, but there's about 12.6. However, I know there has been discussion with the council, and here it doesn't list them by fund. The only one, most of the capital projects are actually funded by special revenue funds or capital project funds that are supposed to be used for its purpose, whether it's street or water, irrigation. But some of them are for general fund purposes and then the capital improvement plan. So those were the items that were discussed with council and I believe questioned. So there may be changes with that as well. We have 120 million in total projects that are underway, 12 million that are proposed for 25-26. And then this is the distribution, most of it going to streets, which is good because it's aligned with what respondents wanted as well and need improvements with. In the beginning, I mean, right there's a sign-in sheet, and then there's also a one-page budget in brief. It kind of goes over the budget. The proposed budget that was presented on June 3rd, and so that's where that lies, and that's what we have proposed for the budget for 25-26. And that would be all. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to go in detail with, or we're accepting of your input. We are providing a staff report to the council for Tuesday, including your input and providing any other changes that may be needed, or if they want to also disclose that in the dais, that's the time where it would be. Yes. Any questions? Any questions?
Madam Smith, regarding the health department, it was made clear at the last meeting that, and the community understands this, that no money's been spent from the general fund. So the community understood it. It was all in agreement with the city council as well. The community also understands that well over $1 million has been spent on the health department, including $500,000 on a consultant who refuses to speak and describe what they're doing. That being said, there's nothing in general fund allotted for this year. The community also knows that each person, the council, will take a vote before any expenditures on the health department can be done. So if the city council, or when, because they all seem to be for this, from what I think the community saw. So when they vote to spend money in the health department, what categorical funding is going to be used? Is there anything budgeted in that categorical funding that will be used? It has been identified, I should say. And third, what can that categorical funding be used for besides the health department?
I can take the last two questions as far as like what, because what we're talking about is the COVID funds that this was allotted for. The time for that has already sunset. Like we're about to close out that federal funding for already. So I just filed like the second to last quarter, and so it's already been allotted. We cannot make changes to what was already presented. And then I have at the end of July where it's a closeout, and we've been audited every year. Well, I think for the last 3 years, because it's a high risk program and it's a large program for the city of West Covina. So I hope that answers that. I mean,
it doesn't.
It doesn't? Okay.
Okay, so if that COVID money has been, if that COVID money has already been spent, it's still a desire for the council to continue with the health department. So the COVID money's gone. So what capital funding will be used now when they approve the next steps of the project? And the second, now that we're done with
yeah, I did your
the
third
second
question.
one is, what money in that identified categorical fund that is going to be used for the health department, what else can the city, what services can the city receive from that besides the health?
Okay, understood. So the third question, I guess I tried to let you know about what that funding was used and how that has sunset. But there hasn't been anything identified for the continuing, like continuing, right, of the health department, not at this time. For the first question,
So at next week's city council meeting, we will have our health director there to provide an update where the city is with the state and CDC for the health department and any significant updates. I know they're working on that presentation right now, and it'll be under departmental matters for the health department. And that should answer the questions of some funding questions and where the city is moving forward, knowing that there's currently not any money budgeted in our general fund for the health department.
So at that meeting, does the community expect to hear an identified funding source moving forward? Will that be usually at that meeting? Because right now, there's no funding source for something that's continuing.
I believe you will see a funding source that is not the general fund.
Well, just a funding source, whatever that may be.
No, so I've seen the framework for the update, and I think it'll answer a lot of the community's questions that have been asked for a period of time. And I think a lot of the delays in getting the answers back is we were waiting on other agencies and departments to get back to us. Because well, residents have questions, so did city staff. And since moving up, obviously I inherited something that now I have a lot more questions about too, as I look to move the city forward.
And businesses have questions.
Understood?
Related to what Matt said. Transtech knows the city for the health department services that are working on. they get a little extra fee on stuff too, when they use, the consultant services. I'm gonna assume that process is gonna continue, and if it is, every time there's a health fair that they're doing, we're paying for that, it's not free. He bills through Transtech. Is that gonna continue? I mean, if you have I worked in a college district, we had health fairs. We just contracted directly with the company to come out and do the student health fairs. And we didn't pay an engineering firm, I forget right now what it's called, but extra money, it just did. So if we were gonna have, it irks me, it really does, because it's all tax money, it's not free. Some taxpayer had to chip in on that, whether they wanted to or not. So I hope we're getting a better bang for our buck. The invoices from the physician's office, every time he brings somebody in for a health fair, this stuff is really quite expensive and it adds up. Is that gonna continue?
I think there will be more.
Where's the funding gonna come from? Will we know that?
I think that.
One of the main questions the committee has is that exact question, and the direction is that the presentation address that issue. I haven't got into all the PowerPoint and all the information that's going to be presented, but the focus is going to be that exact point.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. A couple of questions, actually. On the first slide, I thought I heard you say that the revenue was less than the expenditure, i.e. deficit
Did I?
spending? Did I misunderstand?
You're talking about the citywide
Yeah.
or general fund?
No, that's.
I believe it was the first, that slide you
That
just
one.
passed
Okay,
up.
yeah. Oh, yes, this one. Citywide.
Expenditure 156, revenue 144. So we're spending more than we're bringing in. Is that what I should walk away with? Understand?
Okay, so this is it's a great question. This is a citywide, so this includes all the funds, not just the general fund, which is about close to 80% of the whole budget. So there are fund balances in those funds, and sometimes we don't use them fast enough. Like they're about to lapse. And that could be, I guess you can say, an internal, or like they need to be solved, or sometimes there's issues that come up. So yes, that is formulating in there, and we want a budget to use those funds. This is not the general fund. The general fund, our aim is always to have that balance. But there's other funds, yes, we want to get rid of RMRA, I can think of at the top of my head, where we want to get rid of the money, or we need to use the money for its purpose. So yes, there's a fund balance there. We're getting maybe 3 million, but we have a fund balance that we didn't spend from the prior year, so I need to spend 9 million.
So either one of these do not reflect the general fund?
The general-
Or that isn't included in this?
Correct.
Okay,
So it's included in there. Okay, so you want just general.
Is there a breakout showing the impact on the general fund? Of all the
So,
monies that are being spent, that are being taxed on the general fund, is there any clear slide in there?
yeah, so the general fund is 82 million. And I guess you can say it's out of that 156.1 million is included in there. Oh, it looks a little light from there, but, and that's 67, I said 80, but it's about 67% of the citywide expenditures. Citywide, there's lots of funds that we're still using. So that's what that's used, it is included in there. Now, and I know you, as a community member, you want to know really what the general fund is, because a lot of the other funds, they're coming from state and there's different purposes for it. So that's where I go a little bit more into this general fund, go into the fund balance. this is the general fund revenue. This 96 million is the 25-26. This is just general fund. $82 is just general fund. Now you're saying, where's the difference between 96 and 82 now? So that is your transfers, and that goes into your debt service fund. And that's because here, oh, no.
Debt service being unfunded liabilities?
No, so your unfunded liabilities is actually included in your salaries per employee, so that would go actually through your departments. Debt service would be your bonds, your bond payments. But I guess you can, for the pension obligation bonds, for debt.
Okay, that helped me. Now, kind of piggybacking on Matt's earlier question, at your first presentation to council on this budget, you seem to indicate not a favorable budget. And we're asked to go back and reevaluate. The mayor suggested that you forecast certain revenue streams that really haven't been realized, undeveloped land, unsold land. If in fact that's how you came up with this second version of the budget, I guess my question would be, why isn't it fair to project the impending costs that we're going to incur from the health department, seeing that it's at the doorway of coming in and being approved according to the last council meeting? Why would you want to forecast and project those expenditures? And if you did, where would that leave us tonight?
That's a great question too. So part of the budget process in May 20th is when I presented the long-range financial forecast, which is different, and I think that's what you're probably
First time, yes.
Yes, which is different from the proposed budget, because the proposed budget is now just 1 year, trying to make it work for 1 year. For the long range, it was 5 years, it can be 10 years, some cities even have 20 years. However it may be, but asked to do the long range, and it's a good tool, because then you kind of really do see, yeah, I can make it work for 1 year, but really, what is going on for the years? I have not gone back to reevaluate that at this time. So I cannot tell you if things have really changed at this time, but I do plan to provide that update in July, which I need to in order for the city, which I think this would be our 3rd year going for the GFOA award, which is the highest distinguished award that we can get for budget. And that needs to be included in there. Why, so your follow-up question, why not include one-time costs or something that could happen in the future? Or kind of like the developer, is that kind of the question that was, like the developer, the $3 million that for one-time sale, is that what?
Not necessarily one time.
Not just that.
I would anticipate that there's going to be startup costs that can be anticipated for that probably will not be completely covered through grants, which is another question I have. You mentioned that there's going to be a funding stream identified at the next council meeting.
So you're talking specifically about health department, not what was directed to me at that meeting?
No, the health department in regards to the budget. In other words, why not plug in anticipated expenditures, and especially seeing that it's something that seems to be, it's something that's going to happen according to the mayor. So even if it was a 5-year plan that you presented the first time, you've come back and looked at it on a 1-year scale. Even on a 1-year scale, we can still safely anticipate on a 2-year scale that we're going to be impacted by the costs.
It is practice for finance. I need support, and I need council residents. I mean, you're looking at us to provide you accurate information and advice. And so I don't have that information at this time. So it is not something of practice that we would include in there right now. Now, if that were to be in discussion and it goes presented to council with all that information, then at that time, that would be something that they'd recommend and I implement.
So you're waiting for direction from council. Will that projected possibility be presented at the next council meeting or not?
It's going to be an update of where we're at and a realistic time frame of moving forward. To answer your question, if it proceeds, the expected time frame when we would incur costs, if any, the anticipated funding sources, if it does happen, those type of things. Right now, the budget does not have anything that's been unrealized or cannot be realized. So we don't, Finance Department does not factor in costs that we don't know we're going to incur yet. And what wasn't also factored in is we didn't budget in anything that we have not realized yet. So while we plan to sell properties, we plan to do a whole bunch of things, those monies won't be accounted for and included in the budget until they're realized. So while you anticipate doing things, those anticipations balance the budget were not included. What was done after that meeting, and obviously, I hopped in the shoes, is we did have a follow-up meeting. We sat at a round table, and we went through the budget and took apart the general fund expenses and identified things that could be funded out of other sources, out of special revenues. So if the water fund or the street fund or gas tax, one of those could fund something that we had budgeted in general fund, this reallocated the funding source, which freed up money to the general fund, which brought us to the good. One of the things that the council also, after last meeting, which isn't included in this presentation, is that they asked the city to come back and look at some of the funding for like an elevator, right? To pull back some or all of that money and reallocate that to something that the community actually wants or needs, instead of doing an improvement to something that may not need $1 million, maybe it needs a couple $100,000, and take those additional monies and put them someplace to address resident concerns. So the numbers are real, and even with that, we did go through positions and different things. So July 2nd, we don't go into deficit funding, just deficit spending. We've identified that, look, we're going to fill these positions. We know we're going to incur these costs by filling these positions. So those positions are budgeted, even though they're vacant right now.
Well, I understand the massaging of the budget, but the elevator, for example, was not on the general fund, was it? I thought that would have a specialized dedicated funding. No, okay.
That was general fund.
The general fund, thank you.
Well, I want to say
Go ahead.
general fund funded, because it was in the capital improvement projects fund, which per the fund balance policy, we transfer over. But it is from general fund, so it's not a special like funding where it has to be. It's up to the discretion of council.
Got it. Now, a simple search on Google with regards to funding for Pasadena, Long Beach, it shows the grants are not assured. In fact, they're hurting in that department.
They're not what?
Grants
Are not
to
what?
fund the health department for Long Beach and Pasadena. They seem to indicate that they're having a problem in securing those grants. Or the grants that they do receive do not cover the expenses, which is putting them behind the 8 ball, so to speak. So is there any other funding that you're aware of since you had that meeting, round table, that is separate and apart from grants that you might want to share with us?
Specifically in relation to the health department?
Yes.
Overall? No, I don't have any identified specific funds for the health department, and I don't believe in our budget we've allocated or identified any monies for the health department. And again, when you talk about the health department, obviously Pasadena and Long Beach are a full-service health department. You may have a health department that absorbs and activate certain components in incremental steps rather than taking on the full, huge operation of a health department. So it could be just environmental health, it could be different components of the health department. Because when you say health department, that's wide-reaching and covers anything and everything. So I would think that moving forward, if it does move forward, that it would be baby steps to take on different components of the health department and not just say, we're going to absorb everything that LA County currently covers.
I'm glad you mentioned that. This is my last question for this. Do you know when we will completely separate it from LA County? At what point in time, if this was to come into play after the next council meeting, how much time will the city of West Covina have before the LA County says, you know, that's it?
Well, again, to say completely separate from LA County Health, I wouldn't know. I would think that maybe small pieces of their job duties could be taken on in a whole, but I think the overall separation, I don't see that. So I can't see, Long Beach and Pasadena are the exception. They've had it in place for a lot of years, but this would be the first in the state to branch off and do something like this. So I would think that it would be similar to the inspection component, maybe being the first step, and incrementally taking on other pieces of the health department. Keep in mind, the health department probably has 100 different divisions that cover different things. And realistically, you're not going to say overnight, okay, next week we're going to take over 100 things. I think we bite off and take on what we can first and work from there, build on it, and find out what works and how sustainable it actually is.
That's Michael. My neighbor.
One of the things that frustrates me is the rollover budget concept. I used to do budgeting not this way. I think that the line items, the more traditional way of doing budget, whether you do it, would help the council. It was really frustrating watching them go, where's the increases, what'd you do? Well, they make the decisions oftentimes that causes the increases. When you do the line item, you see last year and the projected this year, you can see that individually you've got X number of people, and last year their salaries were showing this much, and this year it's projected to be greater because raises kick in, you hire additional people and stuff. I'd like to suggest at some point, I don't think you're going to ever make me happy and go back to the traditional line item budget type of thing. It was kind of more what you were talking about, going through and how this stuff gets funded. Budgets are not accounting documents, they're planning documents, and that's what you get taught, and it gets drilled in, it's a plan. Well, when we do the rollover budgets, that is predicated on everything I've read, that it's going to stay the same. But the council doesn't stick to that. They throw in big little surprises, and that doesn't really show effectively in this rollover budget concept. I really encourage, as a taxpayer in this city, to come up with a better way to communicate to the council that this decision or that decision, all those mother may-I's that they do, they cost. I can say this because I'm the resident that contributes to the money. And I sit and I cringe at some of that stuff because it's just costly and it adds to this. Your staff reports are getting better and show some stuff. I read them. But little tiny things add up. And some of these things are really big things that they ask for. So please try and figure out a way to communicate to the council and the public at the same time. Thank you.
I would like to clarify, I mean, I don't know, like, the rollover aspect of it. Most of our expenditures are salaries. So that, based on the FTEs, that takes up a lot of.
That one discussion, I think your 7-year or your 3-year, your projection that.
My financial forecast?
Thank you, yes.
The long-range financial.
Right, and it had increases in that particular council meeting.
Got
The
it.
council was asking questions about the increases, and a lot of those increases increases came by their decisions.
Got
And
it.
that's what they're supposed to do, but they need to connect their decision to the budget.
The
We did that.
assumptions- Yeah, no, I get it. The assumptions for a long range are not gonna be as detailed as like a proposed
No, I
budget.
understand.
So I do, it's line item, and most of our time, you know, doing the budget, it's doing payroll, because that's the largest part, but then we're meeting with every single department. Do you really need this, like, what contracts? If
Right.
we're committed to contracts already, you know, that's where it is.
Right.
But yes, for long range, then I am doing assumptions, and we're not in contract with some.
Okay. Once this budget gets adopted, in theory, it's a rollover, and it's not expected to have any real significant changes. That's the concept with the rollover budget. So I would like to encourage the council to not do something major during the year, okay? Like, don't start some huge program that causes skewing around trying to come up with the money and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot
The
of
10-10-10
information.
plan, yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of information, and even when I do present and I go over this comparison and I'm letting you know, it's consistent, but yeah, there's a lot to do with workers' comp. There's a lot with unfunded and accrued liability. You can see a lot more coming from sworn.
And there's a lot you can't do anything about some of that stuff, because
Right.
that is in the statute.
And to the defense of the departments, that is the cost of it.
But I'm
Yeah,
talking
correct.
about more the discretionary big deals, you know, you can go to the 99-cent store and get something, and then you can go over to another store and get stuff, and another, and it all mounts up. And I'm concerned about the mounting up.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for that suggestion and input.
I do.
You do?
Councilman Cantos, I believe it was Councilman Cantos, asked about a cushion, I think is the word he used, padding in the budget in the event of something similar to what Mrs. Patras was referring to. Amendments to the budget during the year. What, did you do that, or have you done that? And if so, can you describe it for me? Us.
I believe his question was if there was any padding, or if I had any padding.
In the event of an unexpected expenditure.
And as you can see here, I mean, in 22-23, there was 3 million net change in fund balance, so there was, I guess, more expenditures over revenues. This was largely due to the fund balance policy, because there was a surplus in the prior years, but then, of course, since there was over the required reserve, we put it into CIP. So that's the 3 million. But then 23-24, there's a slight, surplus in there as well. As you can see, we also adopted the budget in 24-25 for there to be very tiny surplus there. But the mid-year budget that was presented by the finance director in February, there wasn't padding, because as you can see, the estimate now is negative 1.1 million. So no, there wasn't padding. However, sometimes maybe in actuals when we finish and we're closing out, which right now we're starting to do the closeout now, right after budget, it's closing out. Maybe there would be, because there's a purchase order that was put in, but then they're really not gonna spend it until the next year, but it does roll over, so that's still something that's set aside appropriated. So maybe you'll see a surplus, and that's actuals, and then everything else came up really high, but then there's those appropriations still roll over to the next year. So I love actuals, I love the accuracy, I live in that. But actuals don't always have the right timing sometimes as well, and we are to abide by GAAP, and only when the services are rendered. So even though things are appropriated, it goes to the next year, and you're kind of in a deficit in a sense, but that surplus that you had in 24-25 isn't really real, because then it's just going into there. So there's a long story, and I understand what you're saying, more explanation with it, but sometimes it does get overly complicated. But I mean, I think you can understand that story where, you know, there's appropriations that
Public
goes.
sector budgets are complicated, and they're planned. One of the things, for example, the Mother May I's, I actually counted staff reports on Mother May I's, or minutes. We used to have maybe 20, 25. You guys are up to like 60 or more now. And those things have a cost on them. That is, some of them, I mean, things are gonna come up. That's why budgets are planning. You estimate out the costs. But creating, whether I agree with it or not, the planning should be done now by the council, not in the middle of the year, let's do a chamber, let's do this, let's do that type of thing. They're gonna have things that come up, the residents bring up, the trees, wind, all of that. That's just the way life is. There's gonna be the unexpected. But I'm talking about the conscious decision-making, and that needs to be prioritized. Everything is not an equal priority. It's just not in life. It's hard to sit and watch some of this go on, the 10-10-10 plan.
I read my hand up here, but one of the slides indicated other events. You had quite a list of events, at least most of the events that I'm aware of. Some I attended.
The print would be
Yes.
very small if
Other
I.
events, $184,523. What are these other events that are not listed, identified on this chart, on this slide?
That, it's valid. It's just, it would have been in small print. And so I did go in order from the largest to smallest, and so everything else was under the 20, but I could, off the top of my head, I know there's Memorial Day, there's the Easter extravaganza, because that one's not in there, right?
So just some of it's
Arbor Day.
combination of all our small events.
Yeah, it's smaller than 20,000, and it would have been smaller print, and I would have had someone, oh, what does that say? You know, but I felt like
Right,
this
that
was a
makes
good visual for it. But yes, there's,
General funds.
I'm not, largely yes, but there is also the Community Service Foundation, and there is donations coming from there. So it's not all, but this is what is from general fund, because there
We
is.
don't have a breakout of how much is coming from the general fund as opposed to donations.
Well, that's in a separate fund, because that's a Community Services Foundation. And so, but yes, if there's any deficits from there, then, but I've already budgeted for that, because, I mean, we know that that's how it's been, and so I do have a transfer out for
Does
that.
that include the community service fund and the general?
No,
fund?
this is just, I'm just talking about general fund here.
Oh, that's just general, okay.
I'm gonna switch gears for myself. We are undergoing master park plan.
Yes.
I noticed on the slide, parks, 6%. Where or what funding are we gonna use to grant the wishes of the residents that are being generated at these meetings, community meetings, workshops?
Well, there is separate funding for parks for.
Is that the 6%?
No, okay, so this is, the proposed budget has 12 million already for capital projects. But this is not just general fund. Well, actually, none of it is general fund. It's all different types of funds. And so this 6% is just based on what's already proposed for there. But future, there are, I don't know how many, but I mean, I know off the top of my head right now, there's like 7 million for streets that still needs to be used. I think for parks, it's probably around the same range, but there's several funds that are in, and it would be included in the proposed budget.
Yeah, see, when you throw out that number in capital improvement, as you indicate, that's not exclusively for parks. So that it really doesn't explain how we're gonna cover the cost.
Well, there would have to be phases, and that's where
Okay.
I would, that would be presented at that time. Priorities and
I mean,
have them
that's the
aligned
budget.
with residents and council, because council listens to
Right.
residents, so.
But that could be, it could result in an amendment to the budget.
Yes, but it wouldn't be from the general fund, it would be from other special revenue funds that were allotted for parks.
Parks, none of the park improvement, capital improvements or supporting funding, general?
They're not from general fund. I mean, you could, if that's what you decide.
I realize you may place it in a different account and call it by a different name, but I guess my question is, would you say, well, it comes from the general fund, it really is general fund, not in this
No,
case?
no.
Okay, thank
No,
you.
there's some that they could, because it's up to your discretion, whatever you want to use this capital improvement projects
Sure.
fund for, and they can decide to use that for anything. But no, there are specific, when there's new development, there is specific funds that it goes to for parks.
Okay,
So
thank you.
yes, and that's where I think initially council would want to have that funding used first, and if there's needs for more, then that would be a separate discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Regarding personnel positions in the budget, the past city manager had in her contract that if she was dismissed, she would go back to her desk as assistant city manager. Right now, under city manager, your position is open, or at least at this moment, for director of safety. In this budget, have those three positions been fully funded?
The short answer is yes. Not in the proposed budget, but it is coming forward on Tuesday to include an assistant city manager reprogrammed from an economic development coordinator. So yes, and that is to ensure that in case there's a risk of that, we have a second ACM, so we have assistant city manager. And also it's fitting that right before the adoption of the budget, hopefully the adoption of the budget, there's also going to be a report that's required by the state. It's AB 2561, which is going to report on vacancies, and there's several vacancies that will be reported to city council this Tuesday.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks for being on the hot seat.
Thank you.
They were presented.
Okay. Well, thank you. This is the last one. It's exciting. Yes.
It was very nice to go for you.
Yeah.
Even though it was at the end, and the budget.
Well, this one
was
seemed
both
a little easier. I was like, oh, I've seen everyone here before too. So, but thank you.
Good
Thank you.
questions, though, good questions.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you come to 3 meetings and your questions get better, you picked up a little bit each meeting, and you drill down a little bit more specific to
And
that.
we can't ask really during the council meeting.
Exactly.
You know, we can read the staff report, formulate a question when we have our 3 minutes. But as the meeting goes and the discussion goes, you think of stuff and sometimes
Right.
you're sitting there.
No, yeah.
And obviously, that's why the community wants these type meetings. And again, I inherited, there was none scheduled, so the first step was to get stuff scheduled and try to answer some of these questions and walk people through the budget process and the detail that actually goes into it behind the scenes to bring a balanced budget and a reasonable and fair budget to the city.
And then maybe next year, because we've gone through the cycle, we'll have our workshops earlier before the budget is.
Well,
I'm sure.
Whoever's in charge next year, I guarantee that it will be scheduled much earlier and calendared a lot better, understanding that if you're gonna get input from the community, it should be before you start putting a whole bunch to print. You wanna find out what the desire of the community is first, and then formulate from there.
Right.
No, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And again, I would have started probably 6-8 weeks earlier, but it didn't happen, so I inherited, I set up the meetings.
You did good. I
No.
know, you did good.
You know, I just want everybody to know that the community is being heard, and
Some of us
we're,
a lot.
well, no, that's great. I mean, I love hearing from people.
No.
Some more than others, but yes,
Thanks.
you got it. friend.
No, it's awesome.
No, it's very nice that you did these 3. You could have let it go, or you could have
You
just
could have,
done
sure.
one. and you brought them to different parts of the city. And that's-
Well, hopefully any deficiencies that are brought to our attention, we address adequately and move the city forward. And by listening to the community, I think we'll achieve that.
I think so too, actually. I think we're going in the same direction.
This is off the cuff. That survey, it's kind of sad that there's almost an equal percentage of non-residents that responded as to homeowners that live here presumably. And I hope that not the non-residents' opinion doesn't count, it shouldn't be valued, but at least council should see that that isn't really representative of the population of West Covina. This is a very small sampling of opinion.
I think next year, whoever's in charge, you'll see a much greater emphasis on community outreach and getting people to know it's out there, more than one way to respond and capture what the community really wants. Because not everybody's computer literate, not everybody's on social media. You gotta have different avenues to capture the concerns of the community. I recognize that, being here for years, that it needs to be improved.
One of the things, I know I emailed the announcements from the website or link to it and stuff. And I'll try to encourage people to do it. This year I did not participate, but I usually do. But what I hear, and this is something that is only going to take time and action to show. Why bother? They don't listen. That's a very prevailing attitude to many residents. And I think when they had come to these, they would have seen more of engaged. It's not just a lecture, it's you're listening.
Right, my promise to the community was I would listen and facilitate everything I possibly could to at least get you an answer back, whether it's the answer you want or it isn't, right?
Exactly.
But at least you're heard, you're recognized, that we have your question, your concern, and come back to you with an honest answer,
Yeah.
and not some false narrative.
And we can't expect more than that.
Yep.
That's
I
right.
don't think, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.